Good morning. Welcome to Black Hat USA 2015, Day 2. Hopefully you're in the right place. This is Mandalay Bay, BCD. The talk here is going to be Repurposing OnionDuke with Joshua Pitts. I have a couple of announcements to give you just before we get started. First, we want to remind you that you can stop by the Business Hall, which is located in Shoreline A, for sponsored sessions in theaters A and B. Be sure to check out our Black Hat Arsenal in breakers D, E, J, K. And we have sponsored workshops in Mandalay J, K, and L. Thanks for putting your phone on vibrate so that it doesn't disrupt the session. We really appreciate your help with all of this. And without further ado, I present you Josh Pitts.
Morning. Can everybody hear me? Awesome. Thanks for coming. I know it's early. Well, 9:45 in Vegas is early, so I appreciate it. So like they said, I'm Josh Pitts. I'm Director of Security Research at NOPSEC. Before that, I was at Leviathan Security. And if you're following along in the OPM database, I was at Booz Allen and then PwC. And if you have the OPM database, you don't need anything more. So I'll keep going with that. All right, so I wrote BDF and BDF proxy. That is called, it's short for the backdoor factory. So what it does, it's a set of code, it's written in Python in assembly, that patches payloads into PE, ELF, and Mach-O formats. And BDF proxy is backdoor factory and man-in-the-middle proxy, and so it patches binaries during download. So it's kind of fun, and I'm actually going to take OnionDuke today and put that into BDF, so everyone can use it. So today, real quick, I'm going to talk about repurposing of malware in the media, and then we're going to talk about how I discovered OnionDuke. We're going to reverse engineer the packer. We're going to repurpose it, and then I have 2 demos. So repurposing is what we do as humans, is why we're alive. It just makes sense. It saves us time. And our industry is based on repurposing. We share ideas, and really, if you think about it, ideas travel really fast, and no amount of regulation is going to stop that. And really, as you're going to see after this presentation, nation-state weapons really are not special or magical. They're just developed in private, and then once we get to see them, you know, everybody is up to a higher level as far as what they know and how they can defend against those attacks. So we're going to look at some reputable media sources, and we're going to see how malware has been reused in the media. So we had the Sony attack of 2014. In that attack, the malware was named Stover, and it had a feature that was delayed hard drive deletion. It had similar command and control as a piece of malware used in South Korea called Volgmore, and that was in 2014. It had similar file names and a time delay before deleting the hard drive that was similar to Jokra in 2013, also used in South Korea. And Stover used similar non-malicious drivers as those in the Shamoon attacks in 2012, and I think that was against petroleum targets or energy companies in Saudi Arabia. And via leaked documents, NSA even developed their own called Wiper. I'm surprised it didn't have a different name like Slow Melon or something, but that was in 2012. So the Equation Group and the NSA. Do you guys remember in 2009 when Google asked the NSA for help with the Aurora intrusion? So this gave NSA access to parts of Google's infrastructure and also the malware samples. You guys remember that? Well, in 2015, Kaspersky releases the Equation Group report where the group used several prior known 0 days, including the Aurora exploit and 2 exploits associated with Stuxnet. So according to a report that was released by Der Spiegel, the NSA supposedly leveraged South Korea implants against North Korea. They leveraged existing botnets to deploy their own implants against other targets, and they repurposed a captured 0-day exploit found in passive collection in 2012. So you got to ask yourself, who's reusing whose malware and exploits? So going to the criminal side of the house, there was a report released in 2012 titled by Cyactiv called Cybersecurity's Infamous 5 of 2014. In there were 5 pieces of malware that reused different components. And there was a quote from that: "Recycling malware for reuse is quick and cost effective. For every dollar spent by black hackers," people that are in this room, I guess, "hundreds of dollars are spent by the IT security industry." And if you've ever done incident response, you know that's true, because Mandiant is not cheap. So, and then you have the hacking team. That happened 1 month ago when their documents were dropped on the internet. And it didn't take long for pen testers to reuse some of the components. This was the Flash 0-day. And then also criminals. And this is the Angler exploit kit. So here's some backstory on how I discovered OnionDuke. It was September 2014 at DerbyCon, and I made a side comment that I believe that man-in-the-middle patching of binaries on the internet was happening for certain reasons. You can Google this name and you'll find the story. It was actually pretty interesting. So I stated that, and then the CEO of Leviathan, where I worked, Frank Hyde, he's like, POC or GTFO? And I was like, okay, I will POC, because I don't feel like leaving right now. So I said, you know what, Tor is going to give me the best opportunity to find the man-in-the-middle patching activity, because it's in many countries where this could happen. And basically, when you set up a Tor exit node, you are an ISP, essentially. So I used a module called Exit Map by Philip Winter, and I wrote a module that was, actually I wrote a module that was called Patching Check. And after I wrote it, it took less than an hour to find the man-in-the-middle node that was patching binaries during download. So I collected about 9 samples over 5 days, and I repeatedly downloaded the same files to see if they would change any of their techniques. They didn't. And they only patched or wrapped their malware around x86 files. And later on, F-Secure tied OnionDuke to the Russian government. Well, they called it OnionDuke. They tied it to the Russian government and other possibly Russian-backed crime syndicates. However, the first sample of OnionDuke to hit virus total was 10 months before I found it. And if you look into the details, the user added tags to this when they uploaded it. So they found that someone knew that something was happening on Tor that was malicious, and they didn't do anything about it. And this was happening for 10 months. And how I found it is I Googled for the MD5 hash of the text section, and so they were actually using the same techniques for 10 months before it was caught. So this was actually a pretty effective attack. So when you're going into repurposing software, well, in this case malware, you got to look at it different from incident response. You aren't looking for indicators of compromise exactly. What you're doing is think of it as reverse engineering a competitor's product for the implicit purpose of stealing their intellectual capital and repackaging it for your use. Or you want to make it look like they've moved on to different targets. You want to steal their command and control, or even steal their bots. So you need to understand everything about the malware. What software protections exist, and what features do you think are novel for reusing. In fact, there is little risk of legal retribution from the original authors. For example, the agencies responsible for Stuxnet and its deployment are not going to sue you for reusing their ideas. That would out them, right? So, but the only thing you do need to worry about is probably a metal pipe. So, all right, so let's take a look at the OnionDuke man-in-the-middle method. And to me, sorry, let me go back. For me, the most important feature is the packer, not necessarily the malware that was deployed with OnionDuke. Because if you reverse engineer the packer and you can use it, then you can deploy any malware you want. And so can we take it, reverse engineer it, and incorporate it into open source tools? In fact, I think before the BIS changed their mind on their current recommendations, they had an open source clause. So if you open source your research, then it's okay. So should we open source all nation state malware? You know. So this is how OnionDuke worked. The victim downloads a binary from the server going through a malicious node on the internet, in this case Tor. The malicious exit node wraps the binary with the packer. The user executes said malware, because it has the same icons as the expected program. After unpacking the original binary and malware to disk with a batch file, the batch file is executed. Then the malware is executed. When the malware has executed and infected the host, the batch file replaces the OnionDuke packer with the original file and executes the original file. So it's essentially a shell game. So everything's dropped into temp. File.exe was the OnionDuke malware, and that never changed throughout the campaign. Original file.exe.org, let's say you have processexplorer.exe.org, that would be the name. Excuse me. And then you would have a batch file that would have 4 random integers between _ms and .bat. So I wanted to see what was different because something different was happening. So I looked at the MD5 hashes of the sections through VirusTotal. VirusTotal file provides this information. So you'll notice that the text sections are the same, the R data sections are the same, and also the relocation sections are the same. You'll see that the .data sections are the same size, but they have different hashes. So I wanted to look at the .data sections and do a diff on them to see what was changing. And by doing that, and you also notice that the RSource sections were just completely different in size and hash, right? All right, so what I did is I cut out, using DD, I just cut out the data sections for 2 files and compared them. And this led me to this block of data. And you'll see psexec.exe.org, and you'll see a lot of null bytes, and that is basically the size of the file name that it supported. You'll also see file.exe right after that. And then there were a couple 4-byte blocks that were a little Indian. And I looked at the malware when it was loaded in memory and noticed that what was loaded in memory was not the same size as the file what was loaded on disk. So I was looking at these numbers, and I figured out that the first 4 bytes there is the location of the first file that is compressed and encoded and appended on the end of the binary. The second 4 bytes is the size of that file after it's been compressed and encoded. And you'll see again another 2 4-byte blocks. This is the malware file location and size, same concept. Now, as far as the resource section, Felix Grobert et al. Wrote a paper called Software Distribution Malware Infection Vector, aka man-in-the-middle patching, in 2008. And in there, they described a method for patching man-in-the-middle binaries. However, there's one drawback. The icons would change because he did not develop a method to inherit the icons from the incoming file. OnionDuke solves this issue by appending the original binary RSource or resource section behind the packer stub. It removes any padding and fixes up the relative virtual addresses based on the OnionDuke stub. Now, a side note, BDF proxy never had this issue because I just infect inside the file and I don't modify the size, generally. So, and also in the same paper, this was kind of funny. They said that Tor could be used as a countermeasure to protect against man-in-the-middle patching. It's more of a game of Russian roulette. So this is the packer layout. You'll notice that you have a part that's loaded into memory. Okay, you have the .data modifications that go into the packer stub, the RSource section, the resource section that's loaded into memory. You have the compressed original binary that's appended on the end, and then the compressed malware. So it's really not too complicated. So the stub was compiled with Visual Studio. It uses the GS security buffer check. Of course, it was written in C++. It captures command line arguments. I thought it would pass it on to the batch file, but it does not. I could not get that functionality to work. It supports both ANSI and Unicode-based file names and paths. So That's actually pretty cool because they actually plan to actually support multiple languages. And being if you're attacking Tor, you need to do that because you'll have one language is ANSI, and then the other is going to be Unicode. So they wanted to make sure that they were able to propagate everywhere. So it does support x64 PE binaries, but however, they did not use. I could not get any of the binaries 64-bit. Test binaries to be wrapped or patched because, think about it, this was early 2014. XP was still supported, and so they did not want to wrap a 64-bit binary that might have been accidentally run on an XP machine, which it wouldn't run anyway. So I'm kind of surprised they did not support x64-bit. At least it works. It works fine. So now the XOR. Each file is XORed after compression. The static key is that, and it never changed. It was always that number. And here's just a quick glimpse of the stub, and highlighted is the XOR key. Now, the compression was kind of interesting. It took me some time to find because sometimes I'm not very smart, and I was actually considering looking at the assembly output. Because it was written in assembly, a lot of it was written in assembly, and porting it over to assembly/Python. But before I got too far into that, I did some better searching, and that led me to a blog post from Ron Bose, which was a former coworker at Leviathan, and who works now at Google. And his post led me to the APlib compression library. And so it's a pretty cool compression library. It only supports x86, x64 only. And just a little side note, the hacking team had some code that was called inject proxy as part of their RCS, and they developed it back in 2007, 2008. However, they appended only one file on the end of a binary, and they used the exact same compression library. And so whenever I was searching through all their stuff, yes, I did, and I was really excited that they used the same compression. I almost thought that they wrote OnionDuke, but they didn't. I mean, I wanted to find that so bad, but they did not do that. So all the samples that were captured and analyzed only deployed a PE executable binary. But looking through the assembly, I noticed that they supported two ways to deploy a DLL via run32 DLL. It was via the print message export, and then by ordinal number. No number was pre-populated, and there was a reason for that. Now, however, F-Secure discovered an OnionDuke DLL, but did not recover the associated packer because it's deleted after execution. So it would have been kind of cool to find that. So here are the functions that are responsible for the choices in binary execution, with the run DLL instructions on the left and middle, and on the right is the flow for the binary execution. So going back to that same .data section, there are two 4-byte areas. You can't see it here, but looking at the code, I was able to find that this first 4-byte section, if you have a 0, 1 there, this denotes that the malware is a DLL that you are going to deploy. The next 4-byte section is the ordinal. If the ordinal is blank, it's going to use the print message export. So it's kind of cool. So it had some really interesting features, but they didn't vary it at all because, well, they didn't think they were going to get caught. So their man-in-the-middle patching framework, I believe it was written in C++ because I did not see any delay on Tor itself. I believe, you could tell that it was modular, but they never used any of that functionality from what we could tell. It was campaign. You can have a campaign-based session. And I think that it's going to be seen again, at least the man-in-the-middle patching framework, because they could recompile OnionDuke and change some of the settings and probably get it down to 0 detections again. So their OPSEC wasn't very good. When I first found it, I was using a Python user agent, right? So they just patched everything. And so I think now what they're going to do is focus on particular distros of Windows. They'll say, we only want Windows 7 or above. We're going to target this particular binary, it can't be over this size. I mean, they can make the rules very specific to get a very specific target. So if you can catch the next time they're using this, I will buy you a 6-pack of beer or even more. Now on to reusing the packer. Now what do I want to keep when it comes down to this? Well, I want to keep all of it. I think that it was pretty novel, at least for patching binaries man in the middle. But there's a specific problem. The detection rate is really high. The stub of OnionDuke is about 70 kilobytes. So AVs have a lot of leeway to tag and flag the stub. So I'm going to have to get a little creative. So how are we going to do this? Well, I'm going to randomize the XOR key, the drop file names, and the section hashes. It is going to be a different binary, at least from a hash perspective, every single time it goes through BDF. Now I had to re-implement the rsource stealing and updating. So I wrote my own rsource parser to update the RVAs. So if you know what the resource section is, you have branches, you have leaves, and then at the very end of those leaves, it's a linked list pretty much, you have the address, relative virtual address based on where it's loaded in memory. And so I wrote a parser to update that. Now, we have to compress and XOR the incoming file in user-provided malware. The author of APlib was kind enough to provide OSX, unreleased OSX libraries to support this, so I was able to support OSX and Linux. And then, finally, we're going to update the PE header, the data section, and the XOR keys within the stub itself. So this is what we're rebuilding essentially, right? Okay. So this brings us to the demo. All right. All right, so I'm using Backdoor Factory itself right now. I'm going to patch proc explorer, use the OnionDuke method, and I'm providing a binary that is x64-bit executable. Okay? So I'm compressing right now. You can see this compressed with APlib. I have a random XOR key. And then it checks to see if it's a DLL. And if it's not a DLL, it just continues through. And on the bottom left, I have an interpreter session, x64-bit interpreter session. Now you'll notice that the binary itself is x86. So you can deploy x86 or 32-bit with this. There you go. Got a connection back. Now, one thing with OnionDuke is that the original malware would infect and then die. It would get a persistence location and then die. So you have to migrate to another process for the other process to pop up immediately. Now, you can do this with Metasploit. You can automate it, but I just wanted to go through the steps to doing that. So there you go. I have the migration. You could see the icon flash. And then you have just a normal process explorer. Now, one nice thing about this feature is that if the user thinks that something is wrong, they'll go back and check the binary, right? They can right-click, see if it was signed after it executes, and they're going to find the original binary. And my younger self had problems closing this. I want to apologize. The guy doesn't write very good code either. So now I'm going to deploy a DLL, and I'm going to use the R flag. The R flag is a new feature for BDF. It parses the resource section, the manifest file, and finds the requested execution level. And if that exists in the manifest file, it will patch it to highest available. Okay? So you can see that it checked to see if it was a DLL, and it said yes, it is a DLL. And then it patched highest available in the PE manifest. Now what this does, it invokes UAC. So now the malware is going to execute as admin. You can see the icon denoting that it needs to be executed as admin. UAC prompt, and then a connect back from interpreter. We get system successfully, and then we're going to migrate to a system process. You see the icon change back to non-UAC, so that's a red flag. But if the user right-clicks and checks, you'll see that it's signed. So it's kind of cool. And then look at the digital signature. It is signed by Microsoft. All right, so that's the first demo. All right, so this is BDF proxies config file. Now what I'm going to do is this is how you patch man-in-the-middle binaries, like man-in-the-middle patching of binaries with BDF proxy. This is the config. And what I'm doing is I'm using the OnionDuke method. I'm going to patch run as admin for the UAC prompt. And then I'm using an x64-bit binary with 32-bit binaries as they come across. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the x64-bit, and I'm going to use the x64-bit interpreter reverse TCP shell. Now, let me zoom out of that. So I started BDF proxy, and then now what I'm going to do, there's through BDF proxy, when you execute it, a resource, or Metasploit, or MSF console resource file is output. It's written to disk, and then you can use that to launch Metasploit, and it will populate all the handlers that you use automatically. So now I'm going to go through and download executables from sysinternals. Now sysinternals, you can either use HTTP or HTTPS. It's your choice. Secure or non-secure. And now I'm going to go through and update the config file to change it to a DLL. And the next request that comes through, the DLLs will be served because the config updates on the fly. I'm going to zoom in on this. I'm going to zoom in on this here. So you'll see that the malware is a DLL, or not a DLL, and as I click on a piece of malware or an executable from a website, and now it is a DLL. So there you go. You see that it's actually quite quick for smaller binaries. And so I uploaded a OnionDuke, original OnionDuke binary to a file sharing site. And I'm going to download it and show you a feature that I added that I thought was kind of neat. And what you're going to see next in the video is I'm going to execute a couple binaries. And as that's going on, I'm going to kind of voice track the changes. So what I added was a feature if it sees OnionDuke come across. So I have a signature that's pretty, I think it's pretty solid for finding OnionDuke. If I see OnionDuke come across, I will rip off the original malware and then put the user-supplied malware on the end, thereby hijacking the original intent. So you could either put just a pop-up box saying you should not be downloading over HTTP, or you can put your own malware, right? And so it takes a while for that site to deliver the file because they're serving ads and collecting information on me. So you see here where it says attempting to patch an OnionDuke wrap binary. It went through and it removed the original malware from the binary and then reappended compressed using the same XOR key that was supplied. So if it's a different XOR key, it'll still work with it, even if it's BDF patching it. So if you have someone patching the output coming out of BDF, you can keep this going, and they'll just replace the other malware as it keeps going. So it's kind of a fun. Oh, that's not what I wanted. So it is a DLL, as before. It removes the original malware from the binary, like I explained earlier. And we're going to go ahead and execute the file. And you'll see that I will get a connect back, proving that I removed the malware successfully. And I added run as admin to it, so I improved it. So it does take a little while for it to pop up because the VM is being overworked right now, but you get the picture. All right, so after all that work, the best that I could do with the AV evasion was 20 out of 55. Now, I did not do any large XORing of the text section. I did not use any encryption. I just changed where file names were dropped. For example, McAfee, Sophos, Microsoft, Trim Micro, and Symantec, they all keyed off the file.exe, just that file name. So if you're targeting specific AV, such as AVG, you can write specific signatures for those antiviruses as you see fit. So I flip these slides. So just real three points. So nation state malware is effective, but it's not magical. It's because it's developed in private. Reusing of ideas, techniques, and software are going to continue, and the Wassenaar Agreement is not really going to do much to slow that down. So any questions? Well, I thank you for coming so early. I appreciate it. And special thanks to Travis Morrow, Matt Graber, Jason Butterfield, Chris Trunzler, and Will Schroeder. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for putting your phone on vibrate so that it doesn't disrupt the session. We really appreciate your help with all of this. And without further ado, I present you Josh Pitts.
Morning. Can everybody hear me? Awesome. Thanks for coming. I know it's early. Well, 9:45 in Vegas is early, so I appreciate it. So like I said, I'm Josh Pitts. I'm Director of Security Research at NOPSEC. Before that, I was at Leviathan Security. And if you're following along in the OPM database, I was at Booz Allen and then PW.
Good morning. Welcome to Black Hat USA 2015, Day 2. Hopefully you're in the right place. This is Mandalay Bay, BCD. The talk here is going to be Repurposing OnionDuke with Joshua Pitts. I have a couple of announcements to give you just before we get started. First, we want to remind you that you can stop by the Business Hall, which is located in Shoreline A, for sponsored sessions in theaters A and B. Be sure to check out our Black Hat Arsenal in breakers D, E, J, K. And we have sponsored workshops in Mandalay J, K, and L.
BC, and if you have the OPM database, you don't need anything more. So I'll keep going with that. All right, so I wrote BDF and BDF proxy. That is called, it's short for the backdoor factory. So what it does, it's a set of code, it's written in Python in assembly, that patches payloads into PE, ELF, and Mako formats And BDF proxy is backdoor factory and man-in-the-middle proxy, and so it patches binaries during download. So it's kind of fun, and, and I'm actually going to take OnionDuke today and put that into BDF so everyone can use it. So today, real quick, I'm going to talk about repurposing of malware in the media, and then we're going to talk about how I discovered OnionDuke. We're going to reverse engineer the packer. We're going to repurpose it, and then I have 2 demos. So repurposing is what we do as humans, is why we're alive. It just makes sense. It saves us time. And our industry is based on repurposing. We share ideas, and really, if you think about it, ideas travel really fast, and no amount of regulation is going to stop that. And really, as you're going to see after this presentation, nation-state weapons really are not special or magical. They're just developed in private, and then once we get to see them, you know, everybody is up to a higher level as far as what they know and how they can defend against those attacks. So we're going to look at some reputable media sources, and we're going to see how malware has been reused in the media. So we had the Sony attack of 2014. In that attack, the malware was named Stover, and it had a feature that was delayed hard drive deletion. It had similar command and control as a piece of malware used in South Korea called Volgmore, and that was in 2014. It had similar file names and a time delay before deleting the hard drive that was similar to